is natural theology possible? Some will say no, because God is infinite and you cannot define an infinite being. Our finite terms never actually describe an infinite being. Or no, because logic does not apply to God, because that would limit God. Or no, because God is the object of faith, not reason. Or because God is the object of religion, not philosophical science. Or because human reason is too weak and wrecked by sin. Or God cannot be proven because we cannot prove something unless it is known with certainty. So let's look at this. First of all, is natural theology possible? We all desire that which we know, and we do not desire that which we do not know. If you are unaware of something, you're not desiring it. Why? Because you're not even aware of the concept. We find this in day-to-day life all the time. If I'm unaware that there is a brand new computer out there, or that there's a new iPhone that's out there, or whatever gadget, device, food that you want, if you're unaware of it, you're not necessarily desiring it. But if you know that it's there, it changes everything. Why? Because we desire that which we know. Now, what we find is that God is an object of desire, either good desire or bad desires. We either seek God or we hate God. Now, I understand when the text says no one seeks God, no, not one. But what we also find is that the heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee. Those statements need not be taken in absolute senses. There is a sense in which nobody is seeking God, but yet there is a sense in which everybody realizes that they need something beyond themselves. There is a seeking for God in that regard. However, if we desire God, we must know God. Just like if we're desiring the new iPhone, we somehow know about the iPhone. Therefore, God is not altogether unknowable by natural reason, or we wouldn't have any desire. There wouldn't be any longing for that which is going to bring rest to the restless heart. So insofar as anything is knowable by reason, it can be rational. And it can be a rational science, whether it's physical, philosophical, or mathematical. So the onus of proof really goes upon the person on whether or not an individual has this desire. And if they have that desire, how can you not rationally know something and yet desire it? It seems like a more coherent explanation would be is that you desire that which you know. And the reason that people have a desire for God, or they have an interaction, this heart is restless for thee, is because they in some way, shape, or form know God. Now, I don't think that people who are really buying into the presuppositional approach or this idea of self-evident knowledge would deny that we have these desires and these knowledges. It's how we get them. So at this point, we're all in agreement. We know that there is a God. It's how we come to know that there is a God is where the debate really starts to find its footing within the evangelical world. Now let's continue looking at this. Now, God can be defined in a variety of ways. And some people are going to say, well, you can't seek for God and you can't know God with a natural theology because you're using negative terms, infinite, that negative term. Well, one way God can be defined is negatively as the non-finite, non-temporal, non-changing, non-caused, non-potential being. This clearly distinguishes God from all other types of finite, temporal, changing, caused, and potential beings. We see that there are a variety of ways that you can actually name God. And what we're starting out by saying is all the things that you see here in the sense world, God's not any of those. He's not that finite thing. He's not that changing thing. He's above and beyond that. Now, there are other ways that we can actually name God by finding analogy of perfections in God, where we can talk about the nature of God in that sense. But this is just one way. So if a person's going to say natural theology is useless because we can't use negative language, well, that's one of many ways. But even that negative language gives us true knowledge of what God is not. It's a via negativa approach. Now, in addition to this, we find logic and logical sentences apply to God, and all senses that deny logic and sentences apply to God. The very use of language requires we use logic. Even if our language denies logic applies to God. So let me explain what I mean by this. If somebody's going to talk about God, they're going to use language and sentences to describe it. But if somebody's going to deny God and say, well, logic can't get to it, you're using logical language and logical sentences applied to God in a way to say that logic and sentences cannot apply to God. You cannot have it both ways. But some people are going to say God cannot be both an object of faith and reason. But we would deny that, and we're going to say God can be both an object of faith and reason, just like one truth can be an object for both physics and mathematics. There are truths that go beyond reason, but there are no truths that oppose or go against reason. If a truth goes beyond reason, it is not scientifically demonstrable, like the Trinity or the Incarnation. However, reason can refute objections and provide analogies. In short, if reason can understand an object, then it can prove some truths about God and guarantee a science of natural theology. So just because God can be known in a variety of ways doesn't mean that a different way of knowing God is somehow invalid or doesn't work. Rather, it's just saying that there are proverbially more than one way to skin a cat, or there's proverbially more than one way you can know an object. I can know an object through physical quantitative study. I can know something through abstract study. I can know an object in a variety of ways. But yet God is much more beyond even those physical things. So if there are a variety of ways of knowing particular created objects, why would we deny such a thing about a being who is above all of creation and say that he's going to somehow be known in one simplistic, easy, less rational fashion? God is known both by faith and by reason. And when we know God by reason, we really know him in a true, meaningful way. Now, some people are going to go so far and they'll say this. We can say, if someone is going to say we cannot have a natural theology because humanity suppresses the truth, it would be incoherent to suppress a truth that cannot be known or is not known. My point in this is that in order to suppress a truth, you have to know the truth. But what we're arguing is that a person knows that God exists from creation. We know that there is a creator, but in order to deny the creator, we have to actually know that there's a creator. We don't deny that which we don't know. The fact that someone is suppressing the knowledge of God indicates that knowledge of God is present. The knowledge remains present because the sinner is unsuccessful in fully suppressing the knowledge of God. Now, they do suppress that knowledge, and they do start to do vain, idle things with that knowledge. No clear, historic, Reformed Protestant would ever say anything to the contrary. But here's the point. The issue is that human beings have the knowledge of God, and they distort it. They distort it because they hate it. Just because someone can abuse a science doesn't disprove the science. And just because somebody can abuse the knowledge of God doesn't deny that they actually have knowledge of God. Now, let me give you an example. There are going to be some people are going to say, well, this can't be affirmed anywhere within the historic Reformed tradition. And in the book Classical Apologetics, John Gerstner actually responds to this, and he looks at Calvin and a variety of other figures, but he looks most importantly to Jonathan Edwards. And Gerstner, who we know both believed in total depravity, and Edwards, who believed in total depravity, went on to say this about Edwards' views. Reason must prove the existence of God the revealer. So they're actually believing that reason can prove the existence of God, which is a form of natural theology, and that reason anticipates this revelation, this general revelation. And I know there's a lot of talk about denying that general and revelation and natural theology have anything in common. I think that one would be hard-pressed to find that in the great literature of the Reformers and the Scholastic Reformers. So we're going to use them in many ways joined together. He would also go on to say reason must grasp the message of revelation. Reason must demonstrate the rationality of revelation. Reason must verify the supernaturalness of revelation. Reason argues the dependability of revelation. Reason defends the mysteries of revelation. Reason must interpret the contents of revelation. The point is this. Gerstner goes on to say that there are actually limits to reason. Reason cannot make the knowledge of God real to unregenerate. Reason cannot yield a supernatural salvific revelation. Reason cannot determine all that revelation may reveal. Reason cannot apprehend revelation as revelation. And he goes on to conclude this. We suggest that classic Reformed orthodoxy saw that the noetic influence of sin not as direct through a totally depraved mind, but as indirect through the totally depraved heart. If the mind is obliterated in the sense that it can no longer think, both Sproul and Gerstner say that's actually a form of hyper-Calvinism, not actually classic Calvinism. Now, I don't want to get into debates over the terms in that regard, but the point is that classic Calvinism has always affirmed that there is an image of God in people, but that has been twisted and distorted, not completely erased. It's wrong and incorrect to say that the classic Reformed position denies the image of God. Rather, it's an extreme form of it that denies it. But the point that we find here is that the bigger issue is that the reason that the mind is distorting it is, one, it has to know that which it's distorting, but the heart, the moral problem, is causing it to distort it. It hates that God, and it's twisting and distorting that God. There's a great intricacy and the key relationship between the head and the heart, according to Sproul and Gerstner, and what they would say is the classic Reformed position. Just go look at the book themselves. I'm trying to use their terminology and their categories because I think it represents the classic view on the matter. Now, what we have to find is that when we're discussing the possibility of natural theology, logic actually allows for proofs that prove. Deductive logic necessarily entails a conclusive or certain conclusion. There are some people that are going to say, well, we offer these proofs for God, but they're not certain. In other words, they're saying we want a proof that doesn't actually prove. But that's not how logic functions. People can't do away with the classical position by saying, well, it doesn't rise to the level of certainty. Well, certain people, particular people, don't take it to that, but the classic view is no, logic and rational proofs actually prove. So if there is a natural theology and a logic of natural theology concerning arguments for the existence of God, then we can have proofs that actually prove the existence of God. Moral certainty is not a substitute for epistemological certainty. We are, in many ways, able to both epistemologically and morally be certain that God exists.